The Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy has revealed to Nigerians the steps the federal government is taking to actualize the President's 8-point agenda that has just been recently unveiled. He also outlined his vision and shared his perspectives on the state of the nation's economy. Let's take a listen.
When was the last time when the economy was stable, when it was growing, when inflation was low, when the exchange rate was stable, and when interest rates were affordable? That period was about a decade ago. Growth was above 6% around 2013, 2014. And it was because from around 2010, there was a commodity boom worldwide. Oil prices were high, volumes were high. Nigeria earned, and the government earned into its coffers, over $80 billion per annum, compared to a figure now of around $25 billion. So you can see the difference. And what that points to is that there was a time when government had enough foreign exchange, it had enough naira revenue to meet its obligations and to provide the funding for growth of the economy. It had enough foreign exchange such that when people came in to invest and they needed to import raw materials, to import machinery, government could provide the wherewithal. And so what that points to is that we have a situation where if government doesn't have the money, it needs to facilitate and allow private funding, other sources of funding, such as foreign direct investment, domestic investment by Nigerians in all areas. And we saw some of that in Lagos when Mr. President was governor of Lagos. He opened up the power sector to private investment, the road sector to private investment, infrastructure, waste management, even cemeteries to private investment, because government didn't have the funds and there were those who are willing and able to provide jobs and grow the economy by making those investments. So that is a pointer to the fundamentals of the president's strategy: private investment. And worldwide, there are huge flows of foreign direct investment once you give investors the right conditions. Specifically, where are we headed under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu? He has pointed out in 8 priority areas where he's going to take Nigeria. And his key priorities are to improve the lives of Nigerians by providing food security, by ending poverty. His plan for the economy is economic growth, job creation, access to capital, particularly consumer credit that makes goods affordable to the average Nigerian. And is concerned about utilizing our human resources, our vast, capable human resources, by focusing on inclusivity, women, youth, making all have the opportunity to come to the table and contribute to the growth of the economy and society. And likewise, by focusing on security, by focusing on rule of law and anti-corruption, he intends to create a fairer, a safer playing field for all. Now, for the team that he has put together, he's going to have specific targets, objective measures of performance so that Nigerians can see the targets he set and measure him and the team against them. So, in the area of inclusivity, we will measure literacy rates, measure out-of-school children, and see how successful the trend in increasing literacy, in reducing out-of-school children is, and so on and so forth. Measures will be put in place for security, for rule of law, anti-corruption, and likewise, for the other metrics, there will be measures that allow Nigerians to check how well the administration is doing. In terms of how to get to where Mr. President is going to take us, the key is to increase revenues so that government has enough funding to carry out its obligations and to stabilize the economy as a whole. On the one hand, it is by increasing tax revenue, not by increasing taxes necessarily, but by bringing greater efficiency. We have with us the chairman of the Tax Reform Committee, and the aim is to bring greater efficiency to cut leakages and to maximize the legitimate revenue that should come to government. Likewise, in order to gain and build public trust, there will be emphasis on efficiency in government expenditure, and similarly, effective debt management, so that borrowing has linked to it the return on investment. You borrow and you will see the cash flow that will repay that borrowing. Overall, I would say Mr. President is going to deliver a better life to Nigerians by encouraging investment that increases productivity, that grows the economy, and thereby creates jobs and reduces poverty.
In the coming days, Nigerians are waiting to see the implementation of some of these initiatives. From the Ministry of Finance, NTA News.
Measures to correct the errors of the past and to set the economy on a stable macroeconomic footing so that investment can come in. Meaning that in order to start bringing down inflation, the exchange rate, as well as interest rates, as key macroeconomic measures that need to be right so that investment can come in. They take time to feed through. The benefit does take time to feed through. And in that time, there is hardship. You cannot remove a subsidy without having some effect on inflation. You cannot remove a subsidy on foreign exchange without the rate going up and without having some hardship as a result of the inflationary effect. And Mr. President, while campaigning he promised Nigerians that the poor, the vulnerable, would not be left behind. They would not be left to fend for themselves. And that is why he put in place an incentive or a intervention rather package that not only put fertilizer in the hands of the farmers and food, grains, rice on the tables of Nigerians. He also put in place a 500 billion naira intervention package to produce food, to support the move to mass transit CNG-fueled buses, to support small-scale industries, nano industries, the micro industries, I should call them, with grants, as well as cheap funding, low interest rate funding for medium-scale enterprises. So we put in place immediate relief as well as support to produce food and to produce goods and to bring down the cost of transportation. And that was in, excuse me, and that was in response or in line with his promise to Nigerians. On the issue of the 5 billion, which is the question, it is a combination of grant from the federal government and borrowing by the states. And of course, although the sum of 5 billion is earmarked, you will agree with me that to release such funds across all the states all at once will be self-defeating because it would lead to an inflationary spiral, it would lead to cost of the goods being sold going up, it would lead to the exchange rate moving. And so it is 2 billion naira that has been released as an initial intervention, and FCT will be included, is the information that I have. Leadership, you asked about the initiatives. I think one can only say that any initiative that is sustainable, that will stand the test of time and will achieve its goal, will be continued. In fact, it will be built on. Government is a continuum, and those efforts that are fit for purpose will be continued. The SEC, I can only say, you have mentioned certain happenings there of which I have no knowledge. I would have to go and look into it. What did I meet in the Ministry of Finance? I met an excellent team, hardworking, efficient, capable. What we met as a team was a challenging situation in managing the finances of Nigeria. But as a strong team, we have immediately set to work to come up with solutions. We're expected to come up with solutions rather than focus on the problem. And one of the biggest is liquidity, is funding. Until the benefits of removal of subsidy feed through, and until NNPC's revenue from oil production going up feeds through, there is a challenge to balance the books, particularly in terms of foreign exchange. But what we can say is that really there is quite substantial sources of foreign exchange in Nigeria. There's a lot of cash outside the system, which if brought into the system, increases the money supply of dollars, increases the reserves. And so thought is being given to that. there's funds in domiciliary accounts, which if you give people the incentive, they will utilize those for investment in Nigeria. Nigerians in Nigeria have huge holdings of foreign currency in banks abroad, in financial institutions abroad. We need to provide the environment that brings those funds home to choose to invest in Nigerian economy rather than foreign economies, which is what they are doing now. If you place money in a bank abroad, you are investing in a foreign economy. Finally, we also have huge source of funds from the diaspora. Nigerians living and working abroad who, of course, have their families here and who are interested in keeping a presence here. We have to encourage them to be willing to save in Nigeria, perhaps by improving payment mechanisms and so on and so forth. So we have a lot to aim at. There is plenty of hope. And it is our determination to put in place the kinds of structures and incentive framework that brings Nigerian money abroad and even Nigerian money outside the system into the financial and economic system to work to create jobs for Nigerians. Manipulation of IPIST, I can only say that it is something that we will need to look into. But what I can say is this: when you have a computerized system, when you have automation, we all see it every day. Even Microsoft, they send you updates, upgrades. So there's a very important role to be played in a continuous investment, continuous maintenance of whatever automated, computerized system that is being used. Tribune, I believe I've answered the question on the state of FCT as far as intervention is concerned. And also, I've said that the 5 billion is part loan, part grant. On the part of the federal government is a grant. On the part of the states, they have borrowed. In terms of Tribune again, talked about the hasty removal of fuel subsidy. We have the Group Chief Executive Officer of NNPC Limited here. And I'm sure he can speak for himself, certainly. He will tell you it was not a day too soon. From the perspective of the fiscal, of the government revenue and government expenditure side of things, we at the Ministry of Finance can assure you that Mr. President changed the country. He turned it around from a path of unsustainability that was threatening the very foundations of the economy. The interventions being put in place are because it took so long for that decision to be taken that it would now take much longer than would ordinarily have been needed for the benefits to feed through. And so we need to be helped. The poor, the vulnerable in particular, need to be helped through that process. But rather than being hasty, it was just in time. But in terms of looking at what it takes, and I think, as I said, GCEO NNPC is here to show that oil revenue is improving because the price is relatively high and production is recovering. And so, in the meantime, the responsibility of Mr. President that took that decision is to help people through it. But it's also, we are in a federation, and he's a Democrat. He believes in federalism, he believes in fiscal federalism, and he believes in equity. The state governments also have their role to play. Even the local governments have their role to play, because the correction of the removal of the fuel subsidy to their finances, it means that their finances will now be growing. Because oil revenue goes to the federation account, it is shared at federal, state, and local government level. The benefit will go through the system, and everybody has a responsibility. May I also add that the wealthy, the better off, the corporate sector, the private sector, they also have a responsibility to help those less well off through this period. TVC News you asked about stabilizing the Naira foreign exchange liquidity. I think I've addressed the issue of where we can look for foreign exchange liquidity domestically. That charity begins at home. However, the other sources are, as I referred to, recovery of oil production will provide additional foreign exchange liquidity, which automatically provides additional Naira, additional resources to government. But the key, and that additional funding that's available to government, is not so that the government can now try to invest in various industries and ventures. It is so that the government can lay the groundwork that will encourage and allow and create space for the private sector, particularly foreign direct investment, as well as domestic investment by Nigerians, to feed through and thereby provide government revenue in addition to, let's say, oil revenue, from tax revenue, as I emphasize, not by increasing taxes on Nigerians, whether companies or individuals, but because the companies would then be growing, they would be making profits, and they would be paying taxes to government out of the profit. As the SA revenue would say, the aim is to tax the prosperity, which is fair and equitable, rather than, as companies are shrinking and suffering, trying to pour even more pressure on them by taxing them. We are looking forward to the report of the Committee on Tax Reform to really point the way to an efficient, fair, equitable tax system. We talked of access to consumer credit. It is a critical driver of the economy. People producing need to be able to sell. And it is very, very limiting for you to have to pay for a product that will last you 10 years, that will last you 5 years, that will last you a long period of time. You now have to pay for it all cash on one day. So there's emphasis on providing consumer credit at affordable prices, so that will be not only a relief to the consumer, to the buyer, but it will help to stimulate growth of the economy. And I think on that is also answering the question of anti-corruption in a substantial way. Thank you.